So Gaurangi is here.
Hare Krishna. Welcome everybody to our virtual celebration of Sunday Feast at ISKCON Chicago. And I have a few exciting announcements for today. So the temple is officially opening after a long period of lockdown due to the COVID situation around us on the 25th of July, which is next Sunday. So the temple will remain open and we'll have the Sunday feast, in-person Sunday feast on the 25th. Also, on the same day, we'll be celebrating the Rath Yatra from 10 a.m. through 4 p.m. The Rath Yatra will be held inside the temple room, very similar to how we had it last year. And devotees are invited to join with registration. So the registration has been set up, and it's posted on the ISKCON Chicago website. So we are very, very excited to have all of you today, and we will be getting started with today's session. So our presentation will be given by Subal Prabhu, who is serving as one of the council members for ISKCON Chicago. He came to Krishna consciousness in the year of 1983, and he served at New York Temple, and he also served in Naperville, New Jersey, and he also had a preaching center at the Rutgers University. And whenever I think of Subal Prabhu, I think of him as the life of Sankirtan. And some of you may have joined us for the Festival of Holy Name, or the weekly Sankirtan or monthly Sankirtan festivals. He's amazing with his skills at the Mridanga, and he attracts the hearts and minds of many, many people by his Sankirtan. So Subal Prabhu, I'm very, very happy to have you. Welcome. And Gaurangi is also here. So before we get started with today's talk, Gaurangi will be leading the Narsingha prayers. Are you ready, Gaurangi? Yeah, please unmute yourself and you can get started.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Gaurangi. Very beautiful kirtan. Subal Prabhu, now we are ready to listen from you. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. And of course, I have the task to discuss Sankhya Yoga in a matter of, whatever, 35, 40 minutes, which is almost like an impossible task. And especially today, I got chapter 26, which really gets into the nitty-gritty of the material energy and the 24 elements of matter. Anyway, it's going to be quite a ride. So buckle up and be ready. But before starting, I'd like to make an announcement on behalf of the Temple Council, the Governance Council of the Chicago Temple, in which I'm part. So I'm speaking on behalf of the group. We have 5 members who have accepted recently this responsibility. His Grace Balaram Prabhu, His Grace Radhaman Prabhu, His Grace Paramatma Prabhu, His Grace Naveen Krishna Prabhu, and myself. So on behalf of the council, I'd like to just give you some brief understanding of how we're planning to do this opening of the temple, which is, very much at the desire of the community of devotees. But because also being concerned with the recent uprise of this Delta form of the COVID-19, and also, how it's being a much more infectious. So taking into consideration the safety of our community, especially the most vulnerable ones, our children and our elderly, we like to start this whole opening, public opening in phases. So we're going to do phase number 1 for doing our Sunday feasts, our festivals, and also the opening of the temple in regular hours. As Lila Manjari Mataji announced, we're going to be having the temple open in almost regular hours, in a daily basis, from 7 to 1 and from 4 to 6:30. We're going to have the temple open to the public, so you can come during those times for darshan and make your offerings. And during the Sunday, we're going to have, our program from 5 to 6:30. So that's a Sunday feast. And in phase one, we are going to simply have for the Sunday feast, the Gora Arctic, the in-person lecture, and the Prasadam we're going to do carry out boxes. So you will receive your box and then the temple will be closed at 6:30. So that's phase number one. And obviously, you know, as we start to, you know, things start to get better, we are looking forward for phase number two and phase number three, anyway, to get the temple open into, you know, for the whole normal mood. So for now, we're going to have this phase one, and one important announcement that a policy that we all agree that is taking in consideration the safety of our community is during these public times, the temple is required, is mandatory to have a mask for the temple staff and for the community, for the visitors. So, but you will find more about it. You know, we're going to publish these recommendations and these requirements that we'll have in our website and invitations, so you hear more about it. But we're looking forward to actually see you all, you know, very soon in our, you know, public programs. So that being said, we can dive into today's class. And we're speaking on the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 26. This chapter is called The Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. So just to get a bit of a background, you know, to actually sort of have a bit of an overview of where we at right now in this narration of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the instructions that Lord Kapiladev gave to his mother Devahuti. So Devahuti is the wife of Kardama Muni. Kardama Muni is a direct son of Lord Brahma that was given the service by Lord Brahma to be one of the Prajapatis, or in other words, one of the persons in the universe whose service was to actually populate the universe with living entities. And Devahuti was the daughter of Swayambhuva Manu and Satarupa, also direct descendants of Lord Brahma. So this is at the very beginning of the creation. And Devahuti and Kardama Muni, they had the Supreme Personality of Godhead appear as their son, Lord Kapiladev. And Lord Kapiladev instructed his mother in this science of Sankhya, or this process of Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya is derived from the Sanskrit meaning of count, is to count. And it's a full philosophical system. So basically, analyze in detail the whole principles of the universe, the elemental principles of the universe, spiritual and material, in great detail. And the system itself is a spiritual system. So there is a process of, there's a methodology for the whole system, just like we learn the practices of Bhakti Yoga. And when we study the Srila Rupa Goswami and the teachings of the Acharyas, of the Vaishnava Acharyas, we learn a system. In the Bhagavad Gita, we learn a system of how to practice Bhakti Yoga. And in the same way, Sankhya had a system, a methodology that will culminate in prema, or in love of God. So, so after Kardama Muni left the household and retire into, you know, to practice his final stages of self-realization, then Lord Kapiladev instruct his mother Devahuti. So Devahuti asked many questions. She basically surrendered to the Supreme Lord Kapiladev, although her son, she surrenders, she places herself at the lotus feet of the Lord as a disciple. So she asked several questions, and these questions are spans through chapters 25 all the way to chapter 33 in the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Canto 3, and explains this whole science of Sankhya. So the questions are very relevant, and in total she asked 7 questions. So right now, in the chapter that I'm going to cover, chapter 26, we deal with question number 3. But just to give you a little, so there is a continuum. Just again, we can review some of the questions that she made in chapter 25, because it's important, because there is a continuum to it. So the first question that she asked was that, my dear Lord, please dispel my great delusion that due to what is this? Hold on. That due to my feeling of false ego, so she's actually recognizing that she's afflicted by false ego. I have been engaged in your Maya and have identified myself with the body and consequent bodily relationships or relations. So she recognized the problem that she had, that she's covered by the false ego, by the identifying herself with the body. And Lord Kapiladev answered this question by establishing the position of bhakti as the topmost form of yoga. So he says the system of yoga, the yoga system, which relates to the Lord and the individual soul, which is meant for the ultimate benefit of living entities, and which causes detachment from all happiness and distress in the material world, is the highest yoga system. The word that he used is Adhyatmika yoga, which means the yoga that concerns the soul. And our Vaishnava Acharyas tell us that this system of yoga, that ultimately is what Lord Kapiladev is described as Sankhya Yoga, have these 3 components: Bhakti, Jnana, and Astanga Yoga. So in answering this question to her, Lord Kapiladev established that Bhakti is the supreme form of yoga, it's the highest form of yoga. And that one receive Bhakti and learn the process of Bhakti in association with the great devotees of the Lord, the pure devotees. And then through that association, one can actually gradually, by the practice of Bhakti, obtain the highest stage of being, which is love of Godhead. And basically, he concludes the instructions to Devahuti in establishing the supremacy of Bhakti by saying that the practice of Jnana and the practice of yoga is incomplete without Bhakti. So it's completely dependent on Bhakti for having the proper result. So they cannot exist independent of Bhakti, basically. So the Lord established that, and Mother Devahuti, after hearing the glories of Bhakti, then she asked the next 3 questions. So question number 2, she asks, what kind of devotional service is worth developing and practicing to help me easily and immediately obtain the service of your lotus feet? And then question 3 and 4 are very interesting because she asks basically about, please tell me more about jnana and the details of jnana and also of yoga. So she said that the mystic yoga system, as you have explained, aims at the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is meant for completely ending material existence. Please let me know the nature of that yoga system. So she wants to know in detail the process of yoga that that Lord Kapila Dev, is describing, this Adhyatmika yoga. She wants to know in detail about it. And then she also wants to know how many ways are there by which one can understand in truth that sublime yoga. So she wants also to understand the details of the knowledge or the transcendental knowledge that is behind that yoga. So in the narration, Maitreya Muni, who is actually discussing these subject matters with Vidura, he states, after hearing the statements of his mother, Kapila could understand her purpose, and he became compassionate towards her because of being born of her body. He described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization, as received by disciplic succession. So it's explained that even though the Lord Kapila Dev established this bhakti as a supreme form, as a recommended form of yoga, she still wants to know the details of the other aspects of this whole process, which is the details of the yoga practice and the details of the knowledge or the transcendental knowledge that is behind that. And it is explained, the acharyas explain, that is the sign of an intelligent person, of a person of high intelligence, because you actually need to know the details of things and go in depth into a subject matter. So this is what she is requesting to Lord Kapila Dev. Then Lord Kapila Dev answered question number 2, what kind of bhakti, by saying, basically, I'm gonna just instead of reading, I just paraphrase, because this is an overview of the previous chapter, not the chapter that I'm gonna cover today. So he basically said he recommends this Bhava Bhakti, which is a spontaneous form of bhakti, but that is devoid of any type of material contamination, that is beyond the modes of nature. In other words, it's the beginning of pure devotional service. And we hear this from the teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami, who is the Rasa Acharya, that he explains that he breaks down the different stages of bhakti. So we go from starting with faith or shraddha, we gradually elevate ourselves to anartha nivriti, then to nishta or to steadiness, then to ruchi, that we get a taste, and ashakti, we gain attachment towards the personality of Godhead, and then we reach to this stage of bhava or bhava bhakti. And Srila Rupa Goswami says that in a stage of bhava bhakti, one is actually start to experiencing, it's the beginning of experiencing all these different flavors or moods. And then he says that there's 12 different rasas. We start to experience these rasas, or what he calls as rasa bhakti, that is also that starts in this space of bhava. So this is the type of devotion of the bhakti that Lord Kapila Dev recommends. And in the Bhagavad Gita also we receive these instructions that when one come to this Brahma Bhuta stage, then one can actually perform real bhakti, or this Sudha bhakti is when it starts. So it's in the stage of Bhava, when we actually are free from the influence of material nature, and then we can start to perform a bhakti in a stage of love. So, so Lord Kapila Dev tells, this is the type of bhakti that you should practice. But he also say, for those who are not qualified in Baba Bhakti, then he recommends this Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, which is, regulated. So also Srila Rupa Goswami, he described this Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti is a type of bhakti for people who are still afflicted by the modes of nature. So we have to regulate our practices, and we have to develop a renunciation, and we have to develop knowledge. So then this question of Devahuti, in which he asks, to go in depth into jnana and yoga, becomes very important for the practice of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, because with transcendental knowledge, we can actually support and understand, our practices of bhakti, the regulations, why they're necessary, and also to understand the different stages that we have to develop in terms of controlling our mind and our senses through the process of yoga. So that's how Lord Kapila Dev answered question number 2. And now he is going to answer question number 3. And question number 3 is addressed in this chapter 26 that we're covering today, and the chapter that is going to be covered next week, chapter 27. So in these 2 chapters, he covers this question number 3, which is basically explain jnana. And jnana is also described as Sankhya, because in these chapters, the Lord is going to break down, count all the different principles or elements that are the principal elements of the whole universe. So he will discuss in this chapter the manifestation and characteristics of the elements, such as the Mahatattva. He will describe about the universe of form, and also how the Lord enters, into this whole cosmic creation. So chapter 26, the Lord starts by describing the benefits of hearing Sankhya. And just much the Bhagavad Gita, there's a great parallel that we have in the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev and the Bhagavad Gita. The difference in principle is the same, but the Bhagavad Gita is like Sankhya 101. It's like Sankhya made for people of Kali Yuga. This Sankhya Yoga of Lord Kapila Dev is the process of, elevating yourself to Prema for the people of Satya Yuga. So much more qualified people. And people have much better capacity. For us, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he gave us something very, very simple. But in principle, it's the same. And we can actually run a parallel of the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita with the teachings, that we hear in this Sankhya philosophy. So Lord Kapila Dev tells Mother Devahuti, my dear mother, I should describe unto you the different categories of the absolute truth, knowing which any person can be released from the influence of the modes of nature. So similarly to Krishna, he is explained to Arjuna in chapter 4. This chapter 4 in Bhagavad Gita is called Divya Gyan or Divya Yoga. It's a Divya Gyan or transcendental knowledge. And in this chapter, he says, when one receives transcendental knowledge, one is able to cut the entanglement, the knot of material attachments. In the same way, Lord Kapila Dev tells Devahuti, knowledge is the ultimate perfection of self-realization. I shall explain that knowledge unto you, which by which the knots of attachment to the material world are cut. So very similar. Transcendental knowledge is what will allow one to understand how to carry the process of devotional service or the process of yoga in a way that we can elevate. We can elevate our consciousness to perfection. And at the same time, become detached from our condition of material nature, of the material world. So the Lord established that benefit. And in the same way that the Bhagavad Gita is a structure, we learn that in the Bhagavad Gita, we learn 5 things. We learn about the position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We learn about the position of the living entity. We learn about the position of material nature. We learn about eternal time. And we learn about the activities or karma, the things that we should do. So similarly, in the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev, he now is going to break down a description of the position of Purusha or God, the position of Jiva, and the position of Prakriti, and the relationship that is between these 3. So first, he established the characteristics of Purusha, of the Lord. And he says the Supreme Personality of God is a supreme soul, and he has no beginning. He is transcendental to the material modes of nature and beyond the existence of this material world. He is perceivable everywhere because he is self-effulgent. And by his self-effulgent luster, the entire creation is maintained. So throughout the Bhagavad Gita, it is established the position of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom everything emanates and by whom everything is maintained. So Aham Sarvasya Prabhupada, so many verses are there. So, and Lord Kapila Dev clarifies or expresses what is the relationship of Purusha with Prakriti, with material nature. And he says, as his pastimes, that Supreme Personality of Godhead, the greatest of the great, accept the subtle material energy, which is invested with 3 material modes of nature, and which is related with Vishnu. So basically, the relationship that the Lord has with Prakriti is simply his pastimes. He's never overcome by material nature, but when he comes to this world, it's for his own pleasure, for his own pastimes, it's by his own accord. And this is also expressed of the Bhagavad Gita, that the Lord says, Paritranaya Sadhunan, he comes to this world for a particular purpose. By his own potency, he comes to this world. So similarly, Lord Kapila Dev established that that's an important part of this process of jnana, to understand these principles that are there in the creation. So there is a supreme Lord of Purusha in this cosmic manifestation. There is the jiva and there is material nature. And so the next thing that the Lord is going to clarify for Mother Devahuti is what is this material nature? So he breaks down material nature, starts with explaining that in this world, material nature have these two aspects. One is manifested, one is unmanifested. The unmanifested he defined as pradhan, and the manifested as prakriti, or material nature. So he explains that the unmanifested internal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifested state, and is called pradhan. It is called prakriti when it manifests a stage of existence. So in a nutshell, the characteristics of pradhana is that it's unmanifested, it's eternal, is the aggregate. In other words, is the combination in an unmanifested form of the three modes of nature. That this pradhan is the cause of prakriti, and the inside this pradhan, there's actually the cause and the effects. So it becomes the cause, and at the same time it creates an effect. So, and in pradhan everything is undifferentiated, so it's sometimes defined as a primordial, how you say that, primordial, or that it's just one thing, that you cannot differentiate things, but there is diversity, or there's variety with this undifferentiated. We just see one unmanifested energy, but within this energy there's some diversity. It's just not manifested, it's in a subtle stage. So then the Lord described the interactions of the jiva with prakriti, which is different of the interaction of the supreme soul, or the supreme personality of Godhead with prakriti. So he explains that divided into varieties by her three folds of mode, material nature creates the forms of living entities, and the living entities, seeing these, are illusioned by the knowledge covering feature of the illusory energy. So basically, when the jiva comes in touch with material nature, it becomes cover or illusion. There's this feature of the material nature that is a covering feature. So that feature covers the pure soul and makes the soul think that he is just part of this material nature. Because of his forgetfulness, the transcendental living entity accepts the influence of material energy as his field of activities, and thus actuated, he wrongly applies the activities to himself. So basically, the thought of, I am the doer. Once you are covered by material energy, then the false ego come into place, and then there is the idea that I am the doer of, the activities, the actions that I do. We hear that in the Bhagavad Gita, all these teachings you can actually find in the Bhagavad Gita, like, the material energy creating all these forms. We have the verse of, Mayadi Akshena Prakriti, Suyate Sacharacharam, that, the Lord is the controller of material energy, and material energy is creating all these different forms. And because of forgetfulness, you think, the living entity, the conditioned soul, think he's the doer. Kartaham, what is it? Kartaham, I can't remember the verse now. But, many verses the Lord said, that bewildered by the modes of nature, the living entity think he's the doer. and the enjoyer of the fields of activities. So yes, so Lord Kapila Dev is also saying this. Let me see what time it is now. I have to keep eye. We still have a little time. Material consciousness is the cause of one conditional life in which conditions are enforced upon the living entity by the material energy. Although the spirit soul does not do anything and is transcendental to such activities, is not affected by conditional life. So in the conditional state, basically we are forced by material energy to act in certain way. We have those teachings in the Bhagavad Gita also. The cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned man. The feeling of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. So the idea that this illusion that we're the body and through the body I enjoy the senses, learned men understand that this is a phantasmagoria, this is an illusion. And the type of happiness and distress that is created in the material world is also called a phantasmagoria. It's something that is temporary. And in fact, regardless of how we square it, Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita explains that the experience of happiness and distress in this world is simply equal to distress. So he called this word as dukhalayam, asaswatam, temporary and full of misery. So the spirit soul in his pure state doesn't experience these feelings of happiness and distress in the material world. He is transcendental to this material happiness and material distress. So then Lord Kapila Dev, he breaks down the whole Prakriti, and he recognizes 24 elements that are part of this material nature of Prakriti, this manifested form of the energy, the external energy of the Lord, or the manifested feature of the creation. So 24 elements, and these are divided in this way. Pradhan is considered one of the elements. So the unmanifested form is considered one of the elements. And then there's 3 subtle elements, which is false ego, intelligence, and mind. Then there's 5 gross elements, that is ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Then there's 5 senses, 5 sense objects, or the objects of the senses, and that is sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. And there is 5 knowledge acquired senses: the ear, the skin, the eye, the tongue, and the nose. And there's 5 working senses: the voice, the legs, the arms, the reproductive organs, and the evacuating organs. So all these, they sum to 24 elements. So, Lord Kapila Dev then proceed to actually explain each one of these different elements. And, you know, obviously we cannot do it right now because we're doing this super fast, you know, overview. But very important to have an understanding. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives us a very simplified how you say, a simplified form of Sankhya philosophy. And it's in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In fact, The Sanskrit name of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is Sankhya Yoga. So Sankhya basically allows to understand the difference between matter and spirit. So, so during the second chapter, when Lord Krishna started to instruct Arjuna, he first helped him understand the difference between matter and spirit, and then he goes to describe, you know, the spirit soul, and also he explained in a very simple way the material body. So there's a difference between the soul and the body, and this basically the very simplified understanding Krishna give us in the Bhagavad Gita. And he says to Arjuna, okay, in the second chapter, I have explained to you all this knowledge, this Sankhya. Now I'm going to explain to you how you can act. So he's gonna now to explain the process of yoga, of Nishkam Karma Yoga, by which you can act in this knowledge of Sankhya. And by that, you can become detached. So very similar, but very simplified. In the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev is very, very deep. So he goes to explain each one of these elements. So we're not gonna do that. And the next thing, after actually breaking down all these elements, Lord Kapila Dev explained the 25th element, which is eternal time. And it's a very important element because it's the element that is going to create all the actions, all the movement that happens. It's almost like it's the jump start. It's when the machine becomes started. That's what time does. So Lord Kapila Dev explains time as follows. The mixing element, which is known as time, is counted as a 25th element. The influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who have contacted material nature. In the Bhagavad Gita, this eternal time is explained in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna says something similar. Time I am the destroyer of all, and basically that causes this fear. In fact, Arjuna was very, very fearful after seeing the manifestation of the Lord, in which he displays himself as the eternal time. The time factor, as I've explained, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom the creation begins as a result of the agitation of the neutral, unmanifest nature of the Pradam. When the time factor comes and enters into contact with that unmanifested space, then it becomes, you know, it starts to become animated. So, so this time factor is actually a manifestation of the Supreme Lord. And Lord Kapila Dev continues by exhibiting his potencies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead adjusts all these different elements, keeping himself within as a super soul and without a time. So this time feature of the Lord is another manifest soul. So as a super to the atom and externally in this material world, he remains as, you know, he manifests as eternal time. So that's the 25th element. Now, the Lord then explained these two, that is called, these two principles in the whole creation of this cosmic manifestation. One is called the Mahat Tattva and the other is Chitta. Chitta means pure consciousness. And this pure consciousness, chitta, is also referred as the 26th element. So in the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev, the whole breakdown is 26 elements, the 24 that we had before, and which is, you know, that little chart that I had. Time is the 25th, and conscious, the pure consciousness is the 26th. So the pure consciousness sometimes is also described as the jiva, or the pure soul. So what is this Mahatattva? The Lord Kapila Dev explained, after the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates material nature with his internal potency, material natures deliver the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranyamaya. This takes place in material nature when she's agitated by the destination of the conditioned soul. So I'm sure, you know, this could fly over our heads, you know, like anything. But in short, basically, this Mahatattva is nothing but when a spiritual energy encounters material energy, and then Mahatattva manifests. So that moment in which a spirit enters into matter. So that happens when the jiva enters into matter, but also when the Supreme Lord, as the Super Soul, enters into matter. So this is when that connection is made. That connection is called the Mahatattva, and that is considered is a sum total of everything. And then from that Mahatattva, it's almost like, you know, when a living entity impregnates, you know, the womb, or the man impregnates the woman, then there's something that starts, you know, there's a manifestation of an egg, and within that egg there is the form, you know, there's the material form. So when the Lord enters, you know, the material energy, then that creates something like an egg. It is explained, and in that egg there's a universal form. So this universal form will manifest, and the similar thing happens with the living entity when the living entity is injected into the material energy. So Lord Kapila Dev says, let me see what time it is. Ooh, we're getting closer. Thus, after manifesting variegatedness, the effulgent Mahatattva, which is contained all the universe within itself, which is the root of all cosmic manifestation, and which is not destroyed at the time of annihilation, swallows the darkness that covered the effulgence at the time of dissolution. So this Mahatattva is basically the sum total, the form. This is what is going to create this universal form. And as long as this universe, for the life is this universe, there is this form is not destroyed. It's only when this universe disappears that, you know, that's it. The universe is finished, and the universal form of the particular universe is finished. So it's a temporary form of the Lord, and sometimes that's why this manifestation is also described as, you know, as also non-existent. The Lord also say, the mode of goodness, which is the clear, sober status of understanding the personality of Godhead, and which is generally called Vasudeva, or consciousness, becomes manifested in the Mahatattva. So when the soul enters, or when the Lord enters, the spiritual energy is pure and is perfect, and is what is called Suddha Tattva, or the Vasudeva stage, is pure goodness. So when the soul enters, this material energy is in the stage of pure goodness. The Supreme Lord is pure goodness itself, but when the Supreme Lord enters this material energy, he is not covered. Remember that the Lord makes that clear, that he enters as his pastime. But when the living entity enters, the pure soul enters, that pure stage of consciousness, the Vasudeva consciousness, becomes covered and with the material energy. So, but there's a moment when the entrance is there. The pure soul always remains pure. It's pure. It's just that it becomes covered. But the purity, that stage of purity never changes. The soul is always pure. After the manifestation of the Mahatattva, these features appear simultaneously. The water in its natural state before coming in contact with earth is clear, sweet, and unruffled. So characteristic traits of pure consciousness are complete serenity, clarity, and freedom from distraction. So that's the stage of the pure soul. And but when it gets mixed with material nature, it becomes contaminated. And then I'm going to finish with this because there's no more time. There's more in the chapter in which Krishna described, Lord Kapila Dev described this Karya Srishti and the Virat Rupa. This Karya Srishti basically means this stage of the universal form that is in an egg-like form. And then, and then gradually that form is starting to, that form or that egg-like form is starting to manifest the full form of the Virat Rupa. And that is described, also in this chapter in great detail by Lord Kapila Dev. So it's a very detailed breakdown, very fascinating and important. It's in the Bhagavatam, therefore it's very important for us to understand as we enter into the graduated space or the graduated level of studying these Bhakti Shastras, to understand in much more in depth the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, that is the ABCs of this transcendental science. But when we go into the Bhagavatam, then we get into a much deeper understanding. So this is a much deeper, going deeper into the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, as you can see. So it's a very fascinating thing that we can feel encouraged to actually go deeper and deeper. So I'm going to stop here. Hopefully I help you with this super fast, like fast track presentation of, the Sankhya philosophy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Subal Prabhu. It was a very elaborate presentation. And yeah, it's a fantastic topic. And I appreciate your insights into it. So we can open up for some comments or questions. And I would like to acknowledge our participants here who have joined us. I believe it's Krishna Chanamataji and Geeta Nair. So thank you for being with us here today. Any comments or questions from any of you?
This was good.
Yeah. 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 Srimad Bhagavatam is a very beautiful scripture. And we are very fortunate that, we have a few people here who are willing to give their attention to Srimad Bhagavatam. And it certainly purifies our heart and brings us closer to Krishna. So thank you very much, Subal Prabhu, for bringing us this elaborate topic from Srimad Bhagavatam, Kapiladev's teaching on Sankhya philosophy. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. So we'll see you again in person next week for Rath Yatra and the Sunday feast. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.